thing that we're going to model, and we'll see how far we get, is going to be a wheelbarrow. There's no specific high reason why we're doing a wheelbarrow, aside from Cameron and I were doing a bunch of yard work and I had it on my mind. So we're going to be doing a wheelbarrow. Now, the other thing with a wheelbarrow is that I like, at least as I was trying to think of things we could model, is that there's a lot of different elements here that we can play with. We've got different shapes, different forms that we can play with, and a lot of different pieces that have to come together to make one cohesive piece. So that's what we're going to be working on today. Now, just like animation, when you're going to do any sort of modeling, one of the key bits is planning. Very rarely do you want to just go, oh, I'm going to model a wheelbarrow and just jump in and dive in. Because there are a lot of things that you could run into that will just take time, and you're going to run into roadblocks and all of that stuff. It's good to do planning first. Think through how you're going to approach this. Every model is a little different, so having that a little bit of a roadmap of where you're going to go, how you're going to start, becomes very, very important. Now, part of that is looking up reference. Head first all the way, exactly. I used to do that quite often, and many times it just bit me. So doing a little, even just a little planning can be extremely helpful. And this goes for animation, for anything really. So first up, look up some reference. Like anything, there are many different designs to something you would assume is very simple. Bicycles are a great example. A bicycle is just a bicycle until you actually look up designs, and there are a ton of them. There are a ton of designs for wheelbarrows. There's a ton of designs for the wheels of a wheelbarrow. So take some time and do your research. Now, a program I really like for this, and let's see if my shortcut's going to work. There you go. Is PureRef, which is completely free. It's this program that you can just drag and drop images and arrange them however you want and get a quick collection. So this is what I collected in like 2 minutes before the stream. We've got the main image I'm going to use as my inspiration, a few others of different angles and similar shapes, as well as some more detailed reference of the tires. So why do we do this? Well, it kind of gives us inspiration. Instead of just copying from one model, so let's say I pick this one, I could model off of this, but maybe I want to make it a little bit more interesting. Maybe I want to change things up a bit. Well, I could use the handles of this one, but maybe the body of this one, the actual bucket, I guess you could call it, part of this one, and maybe the tire of this one. I can mix and match and make something that is my own versus just a copy of one image. So we can do all sorts of different things by looking at multiple takes, and we can mix and match. We can find inspiration and things that we hadn't thought of before. Now I'm going with these because this is very similar to my wheelbarrow, so I feel like, hey, I should know what it looks like. I've also got a few different images of the tires to just get a little bit of the extra details in there. Let's see, that reminds me of how you would constrain a character riding a bicycle. Yeah. And then ran into some hiccups with a model I've been working on recently, and for the life of me, I can't get the fluff to feel right. Fluff is hard. If you have an image of it, of what you're working on, I'd be happy to help out if you want. And let's see, for props, I imagine product listings for sale might have good multiple angles. Yes, Amazon is great for product listings. Any like website that just sells products will have many times, not quite a turnaround, but many angles that you can use. Oh, I was asking, how do you constrain? Okay. How do you constrain a character to a bicycle? Quick answer for that is you would take the root control of the character and constrain that to the bike. So you're animating the bicycle, and the root, the main mover of the character, is moving with the bike as well. That would be the main way to do that. If you want the character to be able to like sit on the bike and maybe rock back and forth on the bike and keep their feet planted, then you wouldn't want to use the root, but you would constrain the cog to the seat of the bike, and then constrain each foot to the pedals of the bike, and then the hands to the handlebars. So it's really just finding the control that's going to allow you to have that character follow that object. I actually did something similar where I constrained a character to a horse in one of the previous demos. So if you want, you could check that out and see how I took both and kind of linked them together. So hopefully that helps. And find a screenshot of it. Yeah, if you just drop it into Discord, we can take a look. Okay, let me get the Discord open here. Okay, so if you do want more information on how to constrain a character to a bicycle, we can definitely do that at some point. Now, while the image is being posted out, there it is. Let's take a look here. So you've got little dog. Let me open this up here. Okay. So you've got this image here. So you're trying to do the fluff on the body, I'm assuming, and just the hair in general. If you're doing hair, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can do it with things like XGen, which basically simulates hair. If you want to do more stylized, what I typically use for ZBrush sculpts like this is let's see, I'm just trying to think. For something like this, you would either sculpt the main forms first. So just take a brush and kind of cut in the main forms, shape it. So let's actually bring this into Clip Studio here. Where is the dog? Okay. We'll get to the wheelbarrow in just a little bit. I'll answer the question first. So what you would do is I would use like a damn standard brush and just cut in the patterns that you want. So for example, if you wanted like a floof right here, you would cut in that pattern right there. So you'd get something like this. Maybe the other one comes up through here like this and like so. Maybe more like that. And you just draw out how you want the fluff to work. So maybe we have another one like right in there. And you essentially just layer it together. So something like this. And from there, you can kind of form it out using a clay buildup or a standard brush and just kind of make all the individual shapes. And this is very creative because it allows you to do like curls if you want in the front or whatever shapes you want, depending on how, like I'm kind of thinking like a lion's mane. That's classic lion's mane if you've ever seen classic sculpture, something like that. So you could do something like that. Another way I like to do it is, and this is something I'll use more for hair on a character, is use an IMM brush. So for those who don't know what that is, in ZBrush, it's an insert mesh brush. It basically allows you to drag out different pieces of geometry and put them on an object. And you would just kind of layer it in, start from the base and kind of work your way out. I think I have an example of a sculpt I did semi-recently. Let me see if I can find it here. Here it is. So it basically, you can just do strips of hair and strands of hair, you could say, and use that to build everything else out. Finding the right folder here. Got too many folders. And for some reason, my computer is very slow. Okay. Let's see if I can... Okay. Here it is. So this was a sculpt I did a while back. And you can see that the hair, we zoom in here. I should actually just open it up in Clip Studio. That'll be easier. Have a little bit more control. So the hair is just different meshes that I kind of layered in. I started with the back of the hair and then just kind of worked my way to the front so that I get that layered approach. Yeah, the wheelbarrow, we went a little ways off. We went from a wheelbarrow and it just turned into a person. So you can actually see the individual pieces. So that's one piece right here. And it's just one piece of geometry that kind of, I did a curve and placed it there. You've got another piece right here. Right there. You've got another piece underneath here. So it's just all of these little strips that you put together and then end up with the final result. And it takes a little bit of work, but I really like this method because you can really layer things in and get that feeling of depth. So layering it out instead of sculpting. Exactly. So for example, here you can see there's extra layers behind the ear. You've got extra layers over here. Extra layers coming up from there. And then the ponytail is the same thing. There's just different strips that go through. And because they're all separate pieces, you can adjust them all individually and kind of pull and separate them out. Another hair that I did recently. Let's see if I can find it here. Where is it? My folder structure is kind of a pain sometimes. Okay. Well, actually, I think I've got one here. No, that's not it. I thought I had it right on my desktop, but I must have organized my computer, which means I won't find anything where I want it to be. Okay, here it is. So this mod, where's the final image, or at least the most updated one? I dropped the reference image. Okay, we'll take a look at that in just a second. And for some reason, I don't have a final image of it, which is kind of weird. Okay, I know where I can find it though. Okay, let me find the final image right here. Okay, so this isn't the final one, unfortunately, but we're going to go with what I can find. So this one here. This was a mod I did for one of the AM rigs. And I used that same method. So the hair is just strips that we can kind of see individually. And actually, I think I might know where we can get a better image. Let's actually find the final version. Here it is. So this. With all nice and fancy and lit. So you can see the hair is that same method. Just different strips that I put together and shaped and created a flow with them. So that's the IMM method. I really like it, especially for strands of hair. It's very, very nice. Another way is the sculpting way, which I did on another hair piece here. So on this mod, the hair is not individual pieces, but just one piece of geometry that I then sculpted into hair. And I kept it very simple, very basic. But if you zoom in, like you can see, it's just a piece of geometry, and then I cut it with the standard brush and just added ridges to it. But it works, and especially from a distance, you don't need anything else. The hair here, same thing. I just cut into it just a little bit. If I had a little bit more time, I would have added a little bit more shape right here to help kind of sell that feeling of the hair strands just a little bit. But that's, again, just using the damn standard brush or something like that. Even a standard brush can work. Let's see, the strips are simple plain? No. So the strips are pieces of hair geometry that you can either create, or there's downloads, free downloads for hair IMM brushes in ZBrush that you just draw out, and it'll basically draw a curve in ZBrush, and the geometry will follow that curve. And it's very useful for doing hair very quickly. So something like that. Now, the other question you had was, okay, so here's your reference. Let's open that up. So if you're going for more of this stylized 2D look, I would do it the IMM way, personally. Just because it'll allow you to do much simpler, clean shapes that you can then merge together into one and kind of revise, versus trying to work in one big clump the whole time. And then if you have to make a change, you have to redo the whole big clump. Instead, just work on small sections. So let me go back here. So if you want it very simple, oops, I was drawing on the wrong layer the whole time. We'll have enough undos. Okay. Let's make a new layer. So I would just do very big, wide strips. So you'd have kind of a strip coming through here, another strip coming through, something like that. And you could overlap them however you want. So if you want the bottom hair to kind of be overlapped a little bit more, you could do something like this. Another kind of piece maybe over. Let's see. How can we think of that hair? It kind of comes down around. So something like this. And maybe something like that. So you're just inserting these very big brushes to kind of get the flow of the hair in there. Something like this. And then you could layer in, maybe have a little bit, one kind of in the front here that you can use to kind of poof out the front if you want. You could layer in a few more if you want, or keep it very simple and just kind of have it fade off into one big chunk right in there. And then once you have the basic shape, merge them all together, smooth out the sections you want it to be nice and simple. So this whole section here, and you're good. Same thing with the head, except for the head, I would make sure that the head itself, the head itself is a separate piece of geometry from the actual hair here. So this would be totally separate. This will get you that nice connecting bit and make it easier to model the hair versus the face. And then even the ears, I would make them separate from the body and then merge it all together at the end and just kind of soften the connection between everything. It'll make it easier to work with versus one big chunk. Yeah, I think those would be the main things that I would do, is just use the insert mesh brushes and just look up insert mesh brush or IMM brush hair. Just do a quick Google. You'll find a lot of free versions, and you want to find a nice simple version. There's a lot that are super complex and lots of hair details. Don't go for those, for something cartoony. So hopefully that helps. And if you have questions on that, definitely let me know. Okay. So let's close that. Don't need that anymore. Okay. And Mirror Knight, let's answer your question before we jump back into the demo, the wheelbarrow demo. So your question here was, I wanted to fix some paint weights of a rig I'm animating, but when I replace the reference with the new rig, I get the student warning prompt 2 times every time I save or open the file. I didn't see any difference in my shot, but I went back to the original rig in any case. Did I do something wrong when I saved the new rig? So if you're seeing that student prompt that comes up in Maya, when you open a shot and it goes, this was saved with a student version, and you click OK, and it comes up again, this was saved with a student version. That happens whenever an object in the scene was referenced in. So the more references you have, the more times that will open up. So for example, let's actually draw this out here. Let's say I've got my animation file right here, and I bring in a rig. There you go. Bring it in. And that rig was saved by a student version. When I open up my main animation file, I will get that warning 1 time. It'll come up, this file was saved by a student version. Okay. If I bring in a set piece, maybe there's a house prop, and maybe car, and we bring those in. Now I'm going to get 3 pop-ups saying this was saved by a student version. Well, actually maybe, no, 4, because technically this file as well, this one here, was also saved. So I'm going to be getting 4 pop-ups of that student message. It kind of gets a little annoying, but it's part of using a student version. Now, additionally, let's say on the character rig, I referenced in something on that scene. Maybe I added a hat to the character that I referenced into there, and then referenced in. That counts as well. So now we get 5 of those pop-ups. It is very frustrating, but is part of using the free version. I remember on one scene that I had, I think there were 8 different pop-ups that you had to click through every single time, and it gets very tiring. So yeah, it's part of it. Totally fine if you get that multiple times. So it's not that something's gone wrong or that something broke. You don't have to worry about that. So hopefully that answers your question. If you have any other questions, definitely let me know. Awesome. So back to the wheelbarrow. We're back again. Now, like I was mentioning before, as you're starting to model something, the first thing you want to do is plan, get reference, understand what it is that you want to create. Now, there's a few different things that I look for when I'm trying to create a sculpt. And this actually goes not just for basic models, but any type of model, even much more complex ones. You look for the basic forms. So I'm looking for forms. And essentially what I'm doing is, how can I simplify this to its base shape? A good example of this is the handle. Well, the handle here is a cube. Oop, oop, oop. That's a cube. That's it. There's nothing complex to it. Simple cube. Now, what makes it a little bit more complex is that it becomes a cylinder here at the end, and we have to create a transition between those. But those are two very simple forms. This brace right here, if we break it down to what it really is, it's an extruded cube. It's essentially this shape that then goes in a curve. Well, that's a terrible curve. Goes into a curve. I'm terrible at drawing, so I apologize for this. But that's it. It's just extruded out into this specific shape. But it is still, at its core, a square object. We've got this wedge right here. Well, once again, polygon cube, because there's going to be some thickness on that end right there. So that's a cube. Even the wheelbarrow here itself, we could make out of a simple cube with just a little bit of tweaking and then rounding out the corners. It's a cube with round corners, essentially, because you've got this flat face right here and then just a rounded face there and then flat and flat. So at its core, it is a cube. The wheel is a cylinder. It's just that. There you go. Cylinder. So I will go through my entire model and as much as I can and try to find the simple forms to them. And like I said, this goes for even more complex models. So I shouldn't have closed it off. Let's go back to the model I had open earlier. And okay. So with this sculpt that I did, it's a lot of complex forms, but when you break it down, a lot of them are very basic. So for example, the belt, it's a polygon cube. It's just a cube that's been extruded out. That's it. Extruded out and then back around. This one here, it looks like a belt. It's a polygon cylinder. And it's like it's not even like a pipe. It doesn't have a hole in the middle, at least not when I first made it. It's a solid piece that cuts right through her. But from a distance, it looks fine. And then later I just cut out the center and then it became a belt. This object here, polygon cylinder that has a little bit of an extrusion right on the end here. But really, if you just look at the basic shape, cylinder. This is half a sphere. If you just imagine it was going the rest of the way, it's a sphere that's being scaled up to be ovoid. Even her collar here, it's just a polygon cube that I bent around the neck. Even the boots. It started off as a cylinder that I then just pulled out a bit to the front there. So you can simplify a lot regardless of what object it is. You want a starting point. If you're just going to jump in and throw shapes together and hope for the best, most often things are going to get way too complex and you're going to be fighting to get things to look simple and interesting. So find your basic forms. That's the first one. And think of how you're going to split it all up. So for example, as I'm doing this, the actual barrow of it, I don't know, the bucket of it, the thing you put the dirt in, that's going to be its own separate piece. The wheel, I could do it in one of two ways. I could make the entire wheel one piece, the whole thing. Or I could make it two pieces, the rubber part and then the metal interior. I think about that now. How do I want to approach this? I can change my mind later on as I work on it, but I want to start thinking of this as I go. In this case, if I want the simplicity of adding materials to this, I would probably do this in two pieces. That way I have the rubber versus the metal. And I can kind of refine both separately without having them interact in weird ways. The actual handles here, well, it's going to be separate pieces. You're going to have the one piece here, the other piece there, and then the other one's on the other side. And they're connected by another metal piece on the front. This is why it's good to have multiple references from different angles. So you can see there's that front bit right there. There's also braces on the front, all of that. So I can start to think, okay, how am I going to put all of these together? Which ones are going to be connected? Which ones are going to be separate? And think of how I'm going to separate those out. So think of your forms. The next thing that's very important to think of when you're modeling is your scale. And this is probably the thing that I see most people, what would be the right word, miss out on, is thinking of what is the scale going to be as you make this? How big is it going to be? Now, there's a few different ways you can do it. If you know that, for example, I'm going to use this with a rig, I can put this to rig scale, which means that I bring in my rig and I make everything live at the right size compared to the rig that I'm going to make it for. This is what I usually do for clothing, for anything that a character is going to wear and interact with quite a bit. Now, you could do it using the measurement method. So, I apologize for the sloppy writing. So, measurement method. What does that mean? Essentially, in any program that you're using, the measurements in the program, the units that you're modeling, relate to something. So for most rigs in Maya, they are made with real-world measurements, real-world units. What that means is that one unit in Maya, so for example, if I go in here, let's create a cube, and I'm going to scale it to be 10 units tall. That means that this cube is 10 centimeters tall. By default in Maya, 1 unit equals 1 centimeter. So if this is a 10 unit cube, it is a 10 centimeter cube. So if I know that, and I know the dimensions of my wheelbarrow that I want to make, I can do it at a proper measurement scale. And this is very good for simulation and things like that. Another way you can do it is you can wing it. So what's the wing it method? Essentially, this is one of the ones I use quite often, which is you model the object at whatever size that you do, whatever is going to either be too big, too small, who cares? Once you're done modeling it, you just bring in your rig and then scale it up to the right size. I use this a lot for props that are going to be like it doesn't have to be super precise right away. For example, clothing has to fit the character. If it's not quite the right size, you're going to have to remodel it or make a lot of tweaks. For something like the wheelbarrow, as long as the character holds onto the handles, that's the only thing that's important. The rest can be whatever dimensions and more cartoony, more realistic, whatever I want. So I don't really have to worry about getting a perfect scale right off the bat. The only thing I have to make sure of, though, is that I scale it before I rig it. If I don't do that, then I could run into issues. So if I'm going to wing it and just scale it up later, make sure that you scale it before you go too much further after the modeling process, or else you're going to run into some issues. So we figure out our forms, we figure out what our scale is going to be. In this case, I'm just going to wing it because, why not? I can always scale it later. And there you go. From there, we've got most of our planning out of the way. We can do a few other methods and we can go into a deeper dive on the planning, but honestly, this is the core of it. As long as you think through what pieces you want and how you're going to construct it all together. At this point, we need to go in and just start modeling. Now, how do we start doing that? Well, you could just kind of wing it and just put blocks in and put them together, hope for the best. If you want to capture an object and really get it accurate though, using image planes can be a helpful way to start and get the base form in place. So in Maya, when I'm modeling, I like to use the quad view here, top, front, side, all of those. These are one of the few times me as an animator, I will use this view. As an animator, I will just be working in perspective and my shot camera. When I start modeling, that's when these other views come out. So let's go to our side view here. I'm just going to go to view, image plane, and I'm going to import an image. And I'm going to find the wheelbarrow image on my computer. And there it is. And let's open that up. There we go. So with this, I can just scale that up. And let's move it over to the side here. So let's make it just a little bit bigger. Okay. So from here, I can use this as a way of kind of getting the basic dimensions of my object. I will have to be careful. As you can see, this image has depth to it. It's got perspective. So I can't use this as my be all end all. This is not going to be, I've got to get this perfect, pixel perfect to match up. It's just there as reference, just as a guide to get me started. If things don't end up lining up perfectly, whatever. So we've got that in here. Now, one thing I also like to do is if you select your image plane and open up the attribute editor here, you can adjust your color gain, color offset, and alpha gain here to kind of darken it or gray it out a little bit. I like to do this just because it makes it a little easier to work over top of an image when it's a little less saturated. So I'll just do that. Now I don't really need to see the grid here, so I'm just going to turn that off right there. And from here, we can start working. And the way we start working is we just put in the basic forms we want. Now, one thing that I recommend when you're putting basic forms is don't go too far on one piece right off the bat. So for example, let's say I want to create the arm here. I'm going to go to Create, Polygon Primitives, Cube, and let's just line this up. So get that angle about right. Let's scale it up a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we'll get it as close as we can. Now, one nice thing here is, let's say I want to scale it, but I don't want it to scale up past the end here. I just want to make it thicker. What I can do is hold down Control and click and drag on one of the axes to scale. And you'll notice that it doesn't go past where it was. So I'll line it up right here to the start. And then hit scale, Control, click and drag on the Z axis here. And you'll notice it just goes up in the Y and X. So it basically pulls only in the two opposite axes. So I can just kind of get this the right thickness here. And then from there, let's just get it scaled up close enough. So something like that. Now, technically, we do have to get to the end here, but this is where I need to start thinking, how am I going to blend in from a cube to a cylinder? How can I do that easily? And there's a lot of different ways. I could take a cube and turn it into a cylinder. I could start with a cylinder, turn it into a cube. Lots of different things I can do. And really, it just depends on what I want it to feel like and which way I want it to. Let's see. I guess let me just put it simply. It's personal preference. Whichever way you want, it's totally fine. In this case, let's start with a cube. That's going to be the simple way. And once I get it to essentially where I want it to end. Let's take the vertices and maybe move it back just a little bit right there. So to select the vertices, I just held down right click, and you can switch to all the different selection modes: vertex, face, edges, or back to object mode. So we did that. And now let's just pull out some detail to line it up to the end here. I'm going to select this face, hold down Shift, right click, and hit extrude. This will allow me to pull out that face right there. Okay, and we've got a nice cut right where it should be, where we have that transition. And let's actually scale this down to about the right size. There we go. Very simple. We've got the basic form right in there. Now, I could continue on with this piece. I could keep modeling that, get it all in there. The problem with that, at least for now, is what happens if something changes? What if I find out that some of the scale is not going to work out? Some of the, maybe I'm going to change the design a little bit. I might end up having to redo some stuff. So at least for this first pass, think of it like your blocking pass in animation. If you're used to animation, you just want to kind of get the main blocking in here, the main size and shape of objects. So we've got the handle in here. That's good. Let's get this little wedge in here. That's going to be a nice little piece to get. So I'm going to duplicate this so we have the same angle here. Move that up. And actually, here, let's not do that. Let's do it a little bit simpler way. I'm just going to create another cube. Create cube. Nope. Great. Polygon primitive cube. There we go. And I want it to line up with this edge here. So I can do this in a few different ways. I can take my rotation here. So that's my rotate X, copy that, and then paste it onto this one. And there we go. Or if you want to use a tool for that, you have the, I believe it's under modify match transforms. And you can match the rotation right there between the two objects. So for this object, I could scale it into place, but you can see it's this odd triangular shape. So instead of trying to get everything scaled just right, only to have to model it and kind of reshape it anyway, I'm just going to go straight into vertex mode and just shape it. Put those there. Now here, I kind of want this to stay straight, so I'm just going to go right in the Z axis. I want to keep that bottom face nice and straight to the other piece. And then there, and then whoop, there. There we go. Let's take all of this and move it down. A nice connection in there. There we go. Super quick, super easy. And I kind of want to taper this a little bit more. Okay, so something like that. Now for the actual width of it, I'm just going to look at it from this view and whoop, make it a little bit wider. I don't want it to be perfect, the exact same width. Otherwise, it's going to look a little bit boring. So if it's a little offset, totally fine. There we go. Okay, what other pieces do we want? You'll notice that I'm not doing the other handle just yet because I'm going to want to get the size of the barrow, the bucket, the basket of it in place first. So I'm just getting the arm in here at the moment. But let's get the wheel, the basic size of the wheel in here. So I'm just going to go once again, create polygon primitives, cylinder. Let's rotate it to the side and then just scale it up. Oop. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're doing anything cylindrical is how many faces do you want to have all around the edge? So by default in Maya, when you start off, a cylinder is going to have 20 faces around. And Udbu, thank you so much for the bits. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. So it's going to have 20 faces all around the object. That's pretty good, but it's also pretty high, honestly. If I tone this down, we can get a cylindrical object with less detail. Now, as long as I don't go too low where I start to lose a lot of detail, I'm going to be fine. In this case, for most things, you can kind of bring it down to about 12. And I feel it gives you a little bit more control. Now, one thing I do try to do is you'll notice that certain numbers will make the faces not line up well. So let's actually solo this object. So right here, if you look at the edges, you have an edge going straight down all the way through, straight across all the way through. This is very nice and even. It's nice and symmetrical. If I put this, for example, to 9, now we have one edge that goes down, then splits into 2, and there's no like nice clean lines through here. I try to avoid this as much as possible. This one's a little bit better. It's still symmetrical if you split it in half, but as much as I can, I try to keep it in a way that I have a straight line going up and down and across all the way. That's just a personal preference. I feel it gives me a little bit more control. There will be times when I don't do that, but for the most part, this is good. So we're going to bring this to 12. And that's about the right size. It's definitely a little too thick. So let's bring that in here. Something like that. Now, another thing to keep in mind here is that not all of the elements are going to be perfectly straight. So for example, once we put this piece in front here, it's not going to be perfectly straight out like this. Instead, what's going to happen is this arm, let's get that pivot point in here, move it to the end, is actually going to be out like this. Creates a V shape in there. So again, this is where you have a lot of reference to see how the shape is from all angles. So if we kind of look at this here, you can see how much narrower it is in the front versus the back. We're not worried about that right now. We're just getting the basic shapes in here. From there, we can bring it all in together and create our own cohesive image, I guess you could say. So we've got that in here. Let's get in, because we're going to basically be able to duplicate things. All we really need is this little leg right here, and then the actual body of it right there, as well as one brace on the front. Okay, so for the brace, I'm actually going to hold off for now. I want the arm to be in the right position before I do that. I technically could do it now, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to wait just a little bit. So let's put the body in here. So for the body, let's go to Create, Polygon, Cube, and move that in place right here. Now you can definitely see there's a big perspective shift here. So don't worry about getting it perfect. A lot of modeling, unless you're trying to like really get something absolutely perfect, and that's usually for like 3D printing, if you need to get something to match like 1-to-1 so it fits in a real world environment, then you're going to want to measure things out a little bit more. But in my case, all I need it to be is close enough. Get the basic shape in there, and then from there, I can shape it and change it to whatever I want. So we've got the basic form here. Let's make it a little bit wider. So something, I'm just looking at the outside edges, seeing how wide I want that to be. Something like that. Okay. Does it look much like a wheelbarrow? Not really, but that's fine for now. We're just getting our placeholders in. So we've got this in place. We've got the arm. What do we have left? The braces. Well, let's see. Let me think. Do I want to put the brace in now? Or do I want to start shaping things a little bit more? Think. Let's start shaping things. Because at this point, we've got our main elements. I can use these to help determine where things are going to go and just kind of improve our overall scale to things. So a lot of this is going to depend on the shape of the actual basket, bucket, barrow thing. The thing you put dirt in. So let's actually shape that a little bit first. Now, if we look at the shape, it's got a few elements that we'll need to get in here. And I just realized I drew all of this on the wrong layer. We'll have enough undos. Maybe. Not quite. Oh well. So we've got these flat sides right here. That's pretty simple. They're tapered inwards. You can actually see that here. So it's wider at the top than it is at the bottom. It's also wider at the front than it is in the back. So it tapers down and it tapers in at the back. The edges are all rounded. So the front edge here, this corner, you can definitely see that's a very nice big round corner. You can see how nice and round it is back here. Even the bottom edges, they are not sharp. They are nice and round. That way you don't get dirt stuck in a corner. So we need to round this out quite a bit in order to get this to work correctly. So how do we do that? Well, there's a lot of different tools in Maya that we can use for this. The easiest one to use right off the bat is going to be the bevel tool. So a bevel tool in Maya, let's actually look at it fully here, is you just select some edges. So let's take the front two because they're going to be the same. I'm going to take those, hold down Shift, right click, bevel edge right there. And this will allow me to adjust the bevel as well as add segments here to round that out. So I want this to be quite round here. It does have a little bit of a flat front there. So I want to keep that as much as I can, but nice and round. Something like that. Yeah, let's keep that for now. Now, before I go too much further, let's actually get the taper in here. So I'm just going to select the vertices on the back edge. Let's scale those in. Get that nice taper in there. I could exaggerate this. Wheelbarrows don't, depending on the wheelbarrow, they don't usually have like a huge taper, but we can exaggerate that a little bit, make it a sleek racing wheelbarrow. There we go. And then let's take the bottom edge and scale that in. So let's see, look at this image. Doesn't look like it's got too much of a taper, so let's keep that pretty shallow as well. Something like this. Okay. So we've got the front edge pretty much done. Let's do the back edge. So once again, edge, shift right click bevel, and set the fraction, which is the size of it. You can set the segments, how many extra edges will it add in, basically how much is going to round off. Depth, you can push it in or out. So I want it all the way out. And then mitering and all of those basically change how it cuts things. So for now, we don't have to worry about that. So we've got this. There's our basic wheelbarrow shape. All we need now is that roundness on the bottom. So I'm going to hold down a right click, go to edges, select the entire bottom edge here, and make sure I don't have anything else selected. And then bevel. There we go. And once again, let's just add some segments. Maybe not. Yeah, 2 is fine. And then let's see, how big do I want it to be? Something like that. I don't want it to be too round on the bottom. There we go. Now you'll notice that unlike a normal wheelbarrow, this is kind of not hollow. It's just a big solid piece here. Now the thing is, with a wheelbarrow, it's very thin metal. It's not like it's this big huge slab of something. So I can simplify this quite a bit and just delete this face. And for now, I'm not going to worry about thickness. I'm just going to leave it like this, nice and hollow. And I can add the thickness in at the very end. This will make the modeling process a lot easier on me. Now, the problem here is that the inside is pure black. That's kind of hard to look at. This is because we are technically seeing the inside of the object. The inside should never get any light, so it's pure black. To see this and actually see the color in there, just go to lighting, two-sided lighting. Now we're going to see the inside of there. And just as a test, let's hit 3 to see how it looks nice and smooth. Not bad. Okay. Now, before we go too much further, there is a concept here that I do want to dive into, which is your edge flow and edge topology. In modeling, one thing that you want is faces to be somewhat even. This means that you don't have faces that are huge in comparison to others that are super tiny. A good example of this is this huge face right here versus these very narrow ones right there. That's not usually great. Additionally, you usually want faces to be as square as possible. If they're long and stretched out, it can sometimes cause issues. It doesn't mean they have to be perfect squares, but we want to keep it relatively similar. So as I'm looking at this, I can definitely see that, ooh, yeah, that's not working out too well. I've got a lot of different sizes all over the place. Now, is that a problem? Nah, but it is definitely something that I would want to tweak. Now, before we go into it, there's a very good question here. The bottom looks more rounded at the front than at the rear. Is there a way to adjust the fraction locally? There is no way to adjust the fraction locally, but we can use another tool to help us with that. So let's say we want to round out that front a little bit more, make that nice and tapered. How do we do that? Well, I could just take the edges here, right there, and move them up. But if I do that, I can start messing up the shape of this. So instead, there is a tool here. If you hold down Shift, right click, and let's see where it is. Slide edge tool. If I take this and then middle mouse drag, it'll allow me to drag those edges up, and I can just drag that up. Let's say a little bit right here. It keeps wanting to snap a little bit, so round that out there. I'm going to take these edges right here, hit G to repeat the last command, G as in gorilla. And I can now slide those up a little bit. And let's slide these edges up. There we go. So now the front is a little bit rounder than the back, just a little bit. Now I can keep refining that a little bit. So for example, the vertices right here, I feel like you can see how that angle change is a little abrupt. So I can take these, and you have a slide vertice, I believe. I usually just slide edges. Okay. Well, actually, here, this is actually a good demo. So there's a few things I can do here. Let's say I want to move those two vertices down a little bit. Well, one, it's kind of a pain to have to do both sides all the time. So I'm just going to turn on symmetry. I'm going to turn this symmetry on in either object or world Z. So you can see the Z axis right here. Now if I select a vertice on one side, let's actually do object Z. Oh wait, no, sorry. X. I was being silly. So on the X axis right here. Now I select one side, it automatically selects the other. Boop. There we go. Now I can just take this, and with the move tool active, I'm going to hold down the C key. This is the curve snap tool. If I middle mouse drag on this edge, it'll snap to that edge, and I can just kind of pull this down and slide it along. So I can just do that and round that out nice and quick right there. Okay. So we got that nice and round. Like I was saying before, we do need to add more edges to avoid these kind of big empty faces. But then additionally, you'll notice at the bottom is what we would call an n-gon. An n-gon is a face that has 5 or more edges to that face. So for example, this face here, right there, has 1, 2, 3, 4 edges. That's good. It's a quad. If you look at this object, the faces have 3 edges. Those are triangles. Anything with more than that is an n-gon, and we don't want that. Faces should not have more than 5 edges, no more than 4 edges to it. The moment that this happens, things get really weird, and geometry just doesn't work too great at that point. So I need to split this middle portion here. I need to find a way to turn it into quads. And there's a whole bunch of different ways you can do this. One of them is to use the multi-cut tool in Maya. So with the object selected, I'm going to hold down Shift, right click, multi-cut. And essentially multi-cut allows you to just draw lines and cut the object up. So I'm going to cut from here. And because I have symmetry on, it's going to kind of mess up a little bit. So let's turn off symmetry. So I'm going to cut from here to there. Voila. Now we're starting to add detail and kind of bring everything in together. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this. So in my case, I'm just trying to think how I want the edge flow to work here. I can probably cut this here. And just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to just isolate this object so we don't get the wheel in the way. So if I do this, for example, now this whole front edge is quads. The problem here is that I'm not a fan of these kind of narrow little pieces of geometry. I much prefer if they flow a little bit more cleanly. So I might actually cut this to be something more like that. So see here how now it's all quads, 1, 2, 3, 4, but we don't get these super thin little faces. Now, will this be available on YouTube later? It won't be available on YouTube, but all of these streams are available to rewatch in the videos section of the Twitch stream. So if you go down to the bottom, click on videos, you can see recordings of all the previous streams. So let's cut that like that for now. And you'll notice that I'm not too worried about actually like getting nice clean lines. I can always clean those up later. So let's do the back edge here. Now, once again, if I cut straight through there to there, this is not going to be too bad, but I do want to be careful how I cut around the corner here. If I just go straight down, this is going to get a little weird. So let's kind of add a little bit more detail before we go too much further. I'm going to line these up. So I'm going to take these vertices, move it in the X axis, and by holding down V and then middle mouse dragging on this point here, I'm going to snap those to that point. Now, as I do that, I just want to make sure I'm in world mode. That way it snaps them all in perfect line right there. So select those 2 points, select the axis you want to snap them in, hold down V for point snapping, click and drag, middle click, mouse click and drag. Okay. So what I want to do is add a little bit more detail on these edges here and on the back end. So let's add our multi-cut tool. And if you hold down Control while using the multi-cut, and let's actually turn on symmetry for this, you'll be able to just add a cut all across. So I'm going to add a cut in the middle here, and then probably 2 more on either side there. That should even out our amount of detail. I think I'm also going to add a cut to the center right there. So doop, then doot right there. And then let's add another cut right here. So just evening out the amount of detail. I can also add some cuts, probably 2 cuts here, and then oops, there. So you can see how that just makes it a little bit more even. Let's see, does keeping equal size quads outweigh the added polygons? Yeah, so if you want to, you could reduce the amount of detail instead of adding more, as long as everything kind of is about the same size. And it doesn't have to be the perfect same size, it's just the closer it is, the more things will deform more evenly. So in this case, I just want to kind of keep it a little simpler, and I can always take out detail afterwards if I feel like it. So let's see, how do I want to cut this? Well, we'll definitely want to cut down the middle right there. And then let's just cut right through here. And to simplify this, I'm going to turn symmetry back off. Cut right there. If you want to repeat a tool, so to repeat an action in Maya is to hit the G key, G as in gorilla. To repeat a tool, so the multi-cut tool, you want to reuse it again, you hit the Y key, Y as in yellow. There we go. And then let's see, we can cut right here, right here. So we've got 4s, and then this corner here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So how do we cut this? Well, there's a few different ways. We could cut right through across here and then just add a little bit more detail there. We could, let's see. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to think of how I can cut this in a way that creates a nice edge flow through everything. And I think let me think here. We cut this there. This would be 4. And then, let's see. It's always a puzzle, trying to think of the cleanest way to do this. Now, let me actually, trying to think what's the best way to show this here. So we could do something like this, where we're trying to get, and I just noticed my camera froze. Let me refresh this. Oop. There we go. Aha, I'm back. So we could try to clean this up here, but the main issue is that we're going to have to add some detail somewhere. It's not lining up quite right. Or we can remove some detail. See, do you consider it good to model in Maya? Is it used in the industry? Maya is the industry standard for animation, and I don't know about modeling, but it's very commonly used for modeling. Blender is great as well. Honestly, if you know how to model in any program, you're going to be able to transition the skills. The basic tools that you use are kind of universal throughout. It's really just trying to figure out the best way to cut objects and to bring them all together. So if you want to use Maya, go ahead. Blender is free though, and Blender has some really great modeling and sculpting tools. Personally, for sculpting, I like to use ZBrush though. That's just a personal preference. Okay. So I'm just kind of looking at this, trying to think of how best to approach this. Now, actually, here, let me show another cool thing that I will often do. So let's actually just get rid of all of this. And I'm just going to delete the faces in here. And then just go to fill holes. That'll just fill it with a blank face. Let's get rid of this one. Okay, we're back to where we were. If ever you're having issues trying to decide, okay, how do I cut? Oh, and my camera froze again. No, that's weird. If ever you're having issues like, how do I cut this? What's the best way to do this? One thing I like to do is use a grease pencil tool. And looks like my grease pencil license. I need to find it again. So give me 1 second as I do that. And by using something like a grease pencil tool, you can use something like Epic Pen or pretty much anything that allows you to draw over top of your viewport. Let's go to wireframe on shaded. There we go. With this, I can just go in here and draw over top of my model. And let's actually make sure I've got layers in here. Where's my layer manager? Interesting. It's somewhere on my computer, on another window. Hidden. Blue pencil doesn't want to play nice today. Okay. Well, let's actually save. It's good to save often. Okay. Misspelled, but that's fine. I can always rename it later. So you can use a grease pencil and just draw over top. Oh, that's why I'm isolated view. Okay. So I can just draw over top here and plan out how I want to cut things up. This is actually something I use quite often, especially when you're doing like facial topology and stuff like that. Having to do it kind of live and hope for the best, often it gets very complicated. So I would rather just kind of go through here and kind of plan it out ahead of time very quickly. Like already here, I've gotten a much better flow on that fred edge, just thinking of how to cut it here. Last time I cut it straight across there. So that's going to work a lot better. Now the back corner here, I cut it there and there. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. I can probably, I could put a triangle in there. I'm not a fan of having triangles. So I could add another edge right there. Or I could delete one of the edges. So I could get rid of this one. I kind of want to keep the nice tight detail there because it is a tighter corner. So let's add some detail here. And I can actually take this edge here. And let's use the symmetry tool. And let's slide this edge over. Whoop. Right there. Oh, a little closer. I need to actually, let's go into that symmetry tool options. Sorry, slide edge tool. I don't like that it's snapping. So turn off that snapping there. Much better. So something like that. And I can add more detail right in here. So now we've got that corner really nice. We can cut that here. Right down the middle. This will go right there. Down, down, down. And technically that's all fine. I could probably add another cut right here. If I did that, where would I want it to run? I could do a couple of things. I could have it run right across, which would work, which would be fine. But then the front is going to have extra detail that I might not want. I want to keep that front nice and round and just simple. So what I can do instead is I can reduce the faces. So this is actually, here's an image. I'm going to share this on stream on the Discord at some point. I've got a whole bunch of these images. What we want to do is take this from one number of faces to another. So in this case, let's say we add a split here. We're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 faces. And we want it to go into 2. 1, 2. Right there. So we'll do a 4 to 2 right here. We'll have this structure right through there. And if we do that on a flat plane, like the bottom of this this wheelbarrow, no one's going to notice. So let's clean that up a little bit there. I love drawing things out. It's so much easier. So essentially what we want is to go in here. And let's see. Think this through. It's going to be 2 here. So that goes from the 2 there, there, there. Like that. And then we get a little square there that connects here. Now we got 1, 2, 3, 4. So like that. There we go. There is our nice segmented piece. Right there. And now it's all quads. And drawing it out is way faster. Now, at this point, with the drawing in place, I can just use my multi-cut tool and let's cut it up. So we get our split in the middle. Let's split it across and make sure object symmetry is on. For some reason, it doesn't want to be symmetrical. Let's see. So if something isn't being symmetrical right here, yeah, this line is not quite symmetrical, I think. So we've got our image here. We can just kind of keep it off to the side there. I'm just going to make sure the vertices down the center here are perfectly in line with the center. Right there. Okay, multi-cut. Interesting. Okay. No. Something's not symmetrical. So see here how it's not working out. So if you ever get this, there's a few different things you can do. One is we don't actually have to work on both sides at the same time. In modeling, oftentimes you will work on one side and then another. So I can just delete, boop, that. And we're going to get all of our faces in place here. Let's get this back and lined up. And then we'll just mirror it over. There we go. So what I did here was I just hit the square bracket. If you hit the left and right square brackets, that will undo and redo camera moves. So I just got this right back to where I wanted it. So now I can use the multi-cut tool. Don't need to worry about any symmetry because we're only doing half. Let's kind of move this off to the side so we can see things a little bit more clearly. Okay. So we've got the cut down the middle. And I can do this very roughly if I want to. And just start putting in all of these faces. Yeah, you could also bookmark the camera. So if you want to bookmark a camera so you get right back to position, it's this button right here. If you right click on it, you can create a bookmark and that'll allow you to come back right to your position, which is very nice. Actually, I need to add another cut right here. So let me do that right there. Okay. This is going to cut straight through and down. You'll notice the edges are all kind of wonky right now. I don't mind. I can always straighten them out later. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4. So that's nice and rounded there. I can adjust them a little bit more to be kind of more even. I'm not a fan of that corner and the shape of it, so I'll tweak that a little later. But now, let's see. Do we actually need... We've got another corner right here. I think I missed an edge right there. So we might not even need to go from the 2 to 4. We could just do that. There we go. So now it's all quads. Nice and simple. Now what I'm looking at here, so this is quads right there. That's fine. I might want to just take this corner here and just kind of round that out just a tad. Just a little bit. So something like that. So this technically works. I'm not a huge fan of this corner. So let's rethink that corner just a little bit. Now, this is going like way above and beyond, but I do want to showcase this because it is part of the modeling process, is the trying to get good edge flow and edge topology. I see a lot of students when they first start kind of doing their own models, they will start to add a lot of divisions and whatnot into their models, but without thinking of how it's going to be split. And what ends up happening is that nothing deforms correctly and it just doesn't look good. It's the right shape, but visually there's always going to be kind of these artifacts, I guess you could say. So trying to get this to work correctly is going to be a huge kind of bonus if we can get this to work. If I do this instead, kind of like that a little bit more. So multi-cut, I'm going to add an edge loop right here, and then cut that. Yeah, I like that better. Okay. So we've got that in place. Now, even if it's a prop that's not meant to be animated, yeah. Even if it's not animated, when you try to soften it or adjust it, if it's just got random geometry, there's going to be moments where it's just going to look weird. So I would much rather just try to get it close enough, close-ish. It doesn't have to be perfect, but don't get like huge weird sections in there if you can. Now, we've got that pretty much done. There we go. Let's go to mesh, mirror, and I'm just going to mirror this across the x-axis right there. And then let's turn down the merge threshold. You'll see that some of the points were kind of sticking together. It was trying to merge from too far away. So I'm going to tone that down. And now we have one solid piece again. And right now, the bottom is kind of a little wonky, the way the faces kind of fit together right there. But instead of having to try and smooth these out manually, one face at a time, one vertex at a time, a tool that I really love is the relax tool. So if you go into mesh tools, sculpting tools, and you find your relax tool right here, it's essentially a brush that will allow you to, let's turn on symmetry, relax the edges. And relaxing edges, it's similar to smoothing, except it's going to try and retain the shape of the object and even out the edges and vertices. So I can just kind of quickly brush over here, and everything's now nice and lined up, nice and clean right through there. So I was able to work more quickly without having to try and get everything perfectly lined up right off the bat. And then just use a little bit of the relax tool. Done. There we go. Now we've got our base for the wheelbarrow pretty much done. Let's go a little bit further though. Let's keep two-sided lighting on, turn off wireframe on shaded. And let's just see how it looks nice and smooth. Nice. So I'm just looking for any like weirdness on the surface. And overall, it looks good. At this point, all we need to do is add the lip. So you'll notice that it's got this kind of lip that goes around, and then add some thickness. So let's do that really quick. To add the lip, all I need to do is select my edge loop. So I just double click on an edge all the way around. Boop. And then I'm going to extrude the edge, pull that out a little bit. And I don't mind that it's actually bent a little too far forward there. Yeah, I kind of like that. It creates a little variation. And actually, let's see. So what I'm trying to think here is, how do I want it to look? If we look at our image, it's got this flatness to it. So I could try to recapture that. But, I do also like the lip that we got with the front edge down a little lower. Like that. It kind of feels like it's been pressed down a little bit. If I do feel like, oh, maybe it's a little too low, I can always just bring it up manually. It is going to be a beat up wheelbarrow, so it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. Okay. So something like that, that's pretty good. Now, a general rule of thumb when you're modeling something, and especially when you're doing something for animation or kind of stylized work, is try to over exaggerate. So for example, we've got this lip here all the way around. Don't make it super thin. Try to make it a little bit bigger, because what that's going to do is it's going to make it much easier to read from a distance when you're animating this from far away. Now, we've got that edge there. Now, the next question here is, would you bevel that edge too? Yes. So right here, I would bevel this just because right now we've got a super sharp point to this edge. If I smooth this out, we lose that detail. We don't have enough detail to retain that edge. And as you can see, it's a pretty sharp edge up there. So there's a few different ways we can do this. We can insert some more detail right here, bring that a little closer. Now when we smooth it, it's going to be a little sharper right there. And then additionally, I can bevel that edge. And in this case, the reason why I would want to bevel this edge is, let's say the animator is using this low poly wheelbarrow to animate, and maybe they don't want to go high poly. They just want to keep it as low poly as possible. That edge right now is perfectly sharp. Let's actually show this with a cube. Polygon cube, like that. This cube is nice, but it's so low res that we don't see the visual interest in it. So what I mean by visual interest is with any object in real life, no matter how sharp it is, even the edge of a knife is going to catch the light, and you're going to see a glint and a change of surface from one side here to the other. Right now, it's just going from one to the other. It's just 1, 2. And that's kind of boring. We want a transition. So if we take this cube here and just bevel it ever so slightly, like just that even. Notice how suddenly that looks more interesting and more dynamic, because you see that glint of light right across the surface. And suddenly it just feels more three-dimensional. That's what I want to do here. Right now, this transition is so sharp that it just feels boring. But if I bevel this and just add a little bit, now we get that little bit of a transition. It's not much, but it's enough. And then I think, just for the sake of it, I'm probably going to add in one more edge loop right here, just to help keep that detail. So now we've got that nice sharp edge right through there, but not super sharp. Okay, from there, we just now need to add the thickness. And to do this, let's see, actually one thing I'm going to do is, I don't like this is perfectly flat, so I'm going to take this edge loop here. I'm just going to pull it up just a little bit. Give it a bit of roundness, just for the sake of it. Okay, so let's add some thickness. You'll notice that we didn't worry about thickness before. If we turn off our two-sided lighting, there's no thickness on this object. It's paper thin. To add thickness, I just take the object, I'm going to extrude it, and just pull it out just a tiny bit, right there. Something like that. So we focused only on the basic shape, and then added some thickness, and there we go. Now, the problem here is, once again, the transition here, when we smooth it out, is going to sharpen up too much. So I'm going to add a little bit more detail, and I'm going to show this visually in just a second. But I'm going to add an edge loop right here in the middle, and then let's bevel these edges. Something like that. Now when I sharpen that, we keep that nice thick edge right there. There we go. So that's the tub. Now, like I was saying before, why do we add extra edge loops to maintain shape? Like what's the thought process behind that? Well, let's take a basic polygon cube here. If I smooth this, so in Maya you can smooth objects by hitting the 3 key, or show their low res version by hitting the 1 key. I'm going to hit 3 here, and that smooths it into a sphere. It's very low res, so let's hit page up to add a little bit more detail. There you go. Still technically a cube. If you hit 2, you can actually see the low res and high res version. So we've got this smoothed out sphere. By adding detail, we can control how the object smooths. So the areas with more detail will hold their shape a little bit more. For example, if I add an extra edge loop right here, suddenly we have a bullet bill. It's trying to retain that edge because there's more detail in that area. If I add even more here, it sharpens it up even more. If I add detail here, it's trying to retain that. It's trying to find the average between edges, and the more edges, the more it'll retain that original shape. So that's what I was doing here. By adding just a few more edge loops in that area along that edge, it doesn't round it out so much that it loses form and just kind of collapses in on itself, but instead holds that distinct shape I want. And we can use this to our advantage to get nice sharp edges, like right in here, where we have a lot of detail right up close to each other, or nice subtle bevels, like down here. If I added another edge loop right here, and let's, make sure I hold control there. We add that in there. Now you get that little delineation on the bottom. You see how it's catching the light right there? Which actually might be something I want. Nah, for now we'll keep it nice and smooth. There we go. So we've got that. Now I do feel like it's a little too thin. So let's see if I can go back through my construction history and just extrude this a little bit more. The nice thing in Maya is that you do have construction history, so every action you do is saved. So you can always just kind of go back and adjust things. It doesn't always work, I will admit, but it does work most of the time. Now, one thing I do find is that I'm getting a very sharp edge right in here. And I think that's just the extrude not being happy with itself. There's some edges that are kind of collapsing in right in there. So I can get rid of them or pull them out, one or the other. Let's see. So instead of trying to fiddle this through, I'm just going to select the edge loop, hit delete edge. Okay. So now if I come down here, smooth that out. There we go. We're not getting that weird, super sharp line. I could add a little bit more detail though, back in to keep that corner. There we go. So that's done. Let's call that here. We've got our bucket. With this, let's set up, what should we do next? The wheel would be pretty simple. Yeah, let's do the wheel first. So we had talked about before doing the wheel in two parts. One is going to be the metal, one is going to be the actual rubber. So this is once again where you want to have your reference. So I've got my reference here open of different tires and their shapes. I'm going to keep this here. And let's create, let's see, let's create the metal first. And the rubber, there's a few different ways we can do this. I could duplicate this and just cut a hole in the center. We don't necessarily even need to cut a hole. Here, actually, yeah, let's do it this way. Let's do the rubber first. So this is going to be our rubber for the wheel. And the rubber has a very specific shape to it. So let's come in here. And that is that there's this kind of rounded edge here on the side. And then you go into the actual tread, which has a sharper corner to it. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the tread detail. That's something we can add in later. But I do want to capture the basic form. So let's take our polygon cylinder. Let's add another subdivision to the height because we want that center bit to be the highest point. And then I'm going to take the edge loops here and just scale that down. That's going to give us that kind of rounded shape. And I'm just following the reference right here. Now you'll notice that, wow, that tire is very sharp. The reason is probably a little too thin. So I'm just going to take the faces there. So let's turn off symmetry. And just move those out. Make it a little bit wider. There we go. So now it doesn't have that super sharp bevel to it. Or bend, I should say. But now I can add in a multi-cut right here. And then use that to help round out the tire even more. So looking at the reference images, they're very tapered, kind of flattish on the top and middle area. And then they very quickly taper down. It's not a nice smooth gradient. It's flatter there. So we're going to shape it like so. And then let's just isolate this so we can make it a little easier to see what's going on. I'm going to add some more detail to the center. Now, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to just select the center faces here, hit extrude face, and then turn down the offset like so. And this will help me figure out how far to go for the metal here. So I'm going to go a little bit past where the metal will be. I'm going to just make two overlapping shapes. And then this edge here gets pushed in. And I'm using symmetry to keep this nice and even. So that's going to get pushed in there. And all I need to do now is round that out. So let's actually extrude this again one more time. Offset that because there's this kind of lip right here. I'm going through a little extra detail. I don't need to, but it's more just so I know where things go. Okay, so that's where the metal is going to sit. That's where the rim sits right there. So let's add a multi-cut right there and just pull that out. Round that out there. So you'll notice that as I'm doing all of this, I'm not using that many different tools. It's a lot of multi-cut and extrude and bevel. You can do a lot with just those tools. So honestly, I think that's pretty good for the tire. We can add more detail when we want to get a, well, actually, I could probably bevel this edge a little bit more right here. So I can bevel it, and let's add 2 segments. I want to just kind of get that nice sharp edge right there, because there is that transition like that. And then I feel like there could be another transition right here. This is where, just look at a bunch of different references, see what you can kind of feel out. You can kind of get much more interesting shapes just by making a few small adjustments. This is a little too sharp here. So I'm just going to use the slide edge tool to bring that back out just a little bit. Soften that out. Yeah, let's go with that for now. So nice and simple. Now I'm actually going to take the center bit here, all of these faces, and just push it right in. I could actually get rid of them if I wanted to. It depends on what you're modeling. Sometimes you don't want to have any open objects. So for example, if I delete these here, we've got an open object. Sometimes that's okay, sometimes it isn't. If it's okay, I can just leave it like that and it's going to get covered by the metal anyway. If I want to fill this in, I could either extrude it like I did with the wheelbarrow, or let's do it a simple way. I could bridge these together. So if I select this edge loop here and here, and then hit the bridge tool, this will bridge these together. Now you'll notice that they didn't connect the faces quite right. So I'm going to just use the twist attribute here and line those back up. There we go. So now we've got a nice tire right through there. And if I did want to create that hollow feeling, because, well, tires are hollow, I can just take these, extrude. Oop. Let's do a couple of extrusions so we keep that sharp edge. There we go. If I wanted to. At that point, I'm doing way too much detail, though. It's just making it heavier for no reason, especially because I'm going to have this axle right in the middle. The hub, the metal bit in the middle. So let's just keep it like that for now. Okay. So with that, let's create a new polygon cylinder and put it in place. Now I want it to be perfectly centered to the other wheel. So I'm going to just snap it using the V key to the vertices right there and there, top and middle. And then let's tone down our subdivisions. Okay, maybe about that size. And then it sits in right around here. Okay. So let's start shaping this. And it's all going to be extrusions, this whole thing. So I'm just going to extrude face, offset, bring that down just a little bit, and probably push it in. It's got a little bit of a taper right away. And once again, I'm just looking at my reference, kind of playing around with two different references to get a feel for it. Actually, maybe I'll round it out just a little bit. Okay, extrude again, hit G, push that offset. Let's push that in. Right there, hit G, offset. Push that in. Something like that for now. I can reshape it later if I want to. It goes pretty deep though. And then it's going to flatten out before coming back out here. And I can just keep going in and adding more detail, just using extrude, extrude, extrude. Extrude is one of your best friends when you're modeling. You can do so much with it. So let's create that nice little bevel right there before it comes back in. Pushes in again. There. There. there, and then there we go. All using extrude. So you just keep hitting the G key, and there you go. Now, let's see how it feels. Ugh. It doesn't look great, does it? It's very soft, and there's not much detail. Well, once again, it's just a matter of adding extra faces, or sorry, extra edges where we want to hold some detail. So for example, this section right here, I feel could be a little rounder. So I'm going to round that out there. I do want to hold these two edges here, so I'm going to bevel those. As well as this edge here. And let's see how that feels. Actually, another thing I'll do before I go further is you'll notice that I've got this big face right here. What that is causing is this big softness to pull through. I don't want that. So I'm just going to delete it. We don't really need these two pieces connected. And then just extrude the edge, boop, back. And actually, let's extrude that. Okay. So extrude, and then just push it straight back. Extrude one more time, push it straight back. There we go. And we don't really need to connect these because it's in the middle of the tire. But now we should be able to keep that nice sharp edge right there. So now we have something like that. I feel like I could add a little bit more sharpness in this section. I'm just going to take all of these. Oops. Nope, don't want to select that whole thing. Okay. Select all of that. This. I don't have to do it all together if I don't want to. But take all of that. And maybe this one. And let's bevel the edges. Let's see how that feels. A little bit better. At this point, I just need to make sure my detail is kind of uniform. So for example, there's a big face right in here. Let's add a few more cuts in there. Hold that shape. Hold this a little bit more. Let's sharpen that. I do feel like this edge here is kind of boring. So I'm going to round that out just a little bit more. And then I kind of want to add a little bit more of a kind of like warp in there. There we go. So we've got that. Now, like I said before, the tire itself kind of looks a little bland now. We can help that by sharpening certain things. So let's round this out a little bit right there, but it'll also help sharpen that section there. I can also... let's round that out here just a little bit. If you feel like it's starting to lose its form, you can always start deleting some detail. So for example, I feel like this edge here is losing a little bit of its integrity. So I'm just going to delete that and then use the multi-cut to add it back in. And that should help soften it up a bit more. There we go. And we can add the tread in later. Let's actually add one more bit of detail right here. And I'm just going to flatten that out just a little bit more. There we go. for now. You can always come back to it. So there we have the wheel. Not bad. I still feel it's a little soft, especially right here. We're not feeling that distinct difference between the metal and the wheel. So I'm going to try and exaggerate that. And I think I'm just going to take the metal here, or sorry, the metal, and scale it in. And let's see how I want to do this. I want to keep this the same size as it is. I just want to scale the rest down. So let's take our faces here. And let's see. I know what to do. So I want to take the whole outer edge and scale it down. Now, this could be very tricky because if I don't do this right, let's select this edge, and this edge, and these two. So if I don't do this right, and I just scale this, you'll notice that I can scale it past the other pieces, and it can start to get really weird if I'm not careful. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn on soft selection. Soft selection allows you to scale things or adjust things on a gradient. So now as I scale it, you can see it's scaling the whole section, not just the outer edge that I had selected. And with this, I can just kind of pull this in just a tiny bit here. And hopefully just enough that we can start to see that rim, which I do need to sharpen up a little bit more. So, multi-cut, going to add another edge right there and another one here. We get that sharp edge right through there. And there we go. Do I need to pull it back a little bit? No, it's good. So I want to cut it through there. There we go. Now we feel that distinction. It doesn't feel like it just blends in one into the other. With different materials, we'll see that even more clearly. Now, am I using a pen or a mouse? I'm using a pen. Oftentimes when I'm doing this kind of work, I like to use a pen. I feel I just have a little bit more control. There you go. Something like that. And do you have any tips on how to improve the performance of the UV editor? It lags a lot. Straightening and laying out UVs, it's a slow process because it's a lot of calculation. So aside from upgrading your computer, there's not really much you can do to speed it up. The biggest thing would be making sure you're working in smaller segments. That way you're not overloading things and kind of forcing it to work too hard. Like just do one small section at a time if possible. Okay. So we've got that. It's not the best wheel right now because we've got no tread, but like I said, we can always add that in later. Now, let's see. There's two other things I want to do here. Super quick. Oh, take care. Thanks for dropping by. And thanks for the bits. I really appreciate that. So let's get this section here in place. Now, actually, before we do that, let's actually get the handle done. So for the handle, we're going from a square to a cylinder. And we've got to create this taper in here. Now, how will we do this? This can be a little tricky. One of the ways you can do it is we're just going to add more detail to this cube here. So I'm going to multi-cut straight across like that, and straight down the center here, like so. But this is not round. That is not round at all. How can we make that round? Well, if you take these, let's take the corners here. I can just take those and beep. There you go. Done. Round-ish. It doesn't have to be perfect. Keeping in mind that this is a carved piece of wood, it's not going to be absolutely perfectly manufactured unless we want it to be. So from here, I need to make sure that that handle stays the same length. So what I could do is I could add a cut here and then move it forward down the handle like so. Or just to show options, I can take these faces here, extrude, just pull those out a tiny bit, and then take these edges right there, whoop, put it back. So let's figure out the length of this. I think right around there should be good. Could probably make it a little thicker, but we'll see. Yeah, it should probably be a little thicker. So I'm just going to select the vertices here and then scale them up just a little bit more. Okay. So with that, we should now have that taper going from a square to a round shape. We're still not quite there yet, though. There's some things that need to be refined. One, it's way too smooth. Ugh. Look at that. Once again, we need to add more detail to hold our shapes. Look at the length of this and look at how much detail we have. Pretty much non-existent. So when we smooth this out, it's going to really stretch everything. So let's add some edge loops. And to do this, I'm just going to use the Insert Edge Loop tool. And let's add, let's start with 6. Yeah, that should be good enough. I just added 6 edge loops right through the whole thing. That's a little easier than adding one at a time. Let's now switch back to our multi-cut tool. And I'm just going to add another edge loop right here in the handle. And from here, let's start shaping this. So one thing I want to do is I want to bevel the edges here, so we can get that nice softening of the square bit. We want that light to catch on this. So I'm going to bevel this edge and just bring it down like so. And now when I smooth that out, look at that. Ooh, so fancy. The problem though, let's make it a little sharper. The problem with this though is now if we look at our handle, we've kind of lost that roundness to it. It added this detail right next to it, and we're starting to sharpen the sides of the what should be a smooth handle. Now, is that bad? No, it could work if we wanted it to. But what if we wanted this to be nice and perfectly round here? Well, what you can do is select the vertices right there, and we'll see if this works because we're at an angle. I'm just going to select those, go to, I believe, Edit Mesh and Circularize. And essentially what this will do is it's going to take the vertices that we have selected and make sure that they are a perfect circle. So I can do that, and then let's make sure I don't select the middle there. There we go. Now, we've got that perfect circular shape right there that then bleeds into a nice square shape. Right like that. So, with that, let's see. Let's kind of finish the end here. I do want the end to have a little bit of a taper. So let's add an edge loop right here. Too far. Maybe there. Like the vertices at the end, and I'm just going to scale those down a little bit. And then I'm going to bevel this edge. Just get that nice sharp detail there. And I think I can add a few more edge loops. Just to hold the shape a little bit better. Oops, not insert edge. Or multi-cut. Multi-cut is a really nice tool. So I just want to hold that shape a little bit more. And then the end here, this is not an end shape that I like, especially for round shapes. What I like is a cap. Proper cap on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete those. Select the edges here. And then I'm going to extrude them out. And let's actually extrude. And then let's actually scale this. Oh, and make sure if Maya freezes here, I'm going to be sad. Come on, Maya, don't freeze on me. I think Maya just closed off. No. Oh well. Hopefully it saved a local version. If not, it's not too hard to redo. Let's see. If we lost everything, honestly, the last bit I was going to do here is just add an end cap. Not hard to do. You just extrude and then merge all the vertices together. So it creates a nice triangular cap to it. And then after that, the handle would have been pretty much done. I would have just sharpened a little bit at the very tip of it. So the tip back here, sharpen that a little bit. But I do want to show how I would approach making that little brace on the bottom, because this is a shape that can be very tricky to try and get just right, especially with those subtle bends in there. So we'll see what we have. If we don't have anything, I'll just do a quick demo, and then we'll probably call the stream here because I will have to get going pretty soon. Maya's taking a little bit to open. But if anyone has questions, definitely let me know. And I hope this all makes sense. I know I'm kind of just rushing through a little bit of it, but it's essentially making sure you know the shape you want and then just adding the detail in gradually and trying to maintain where you want sharp edges versus where you want soft edges. So sharper edges should have a little bit more detail, softer edges a little less. And as you're adding it, you want to make sure that you don't have big wide spaces of no detail, and everything should ideally stay as quads or tris. So it looks like I lost it all. So I was just thinking too, I should save. That would be a smart thing to do. And then I didn't do it. So that's fine. Let's let it load here. Okay. Yeah, wow, we didn't even have the topology on the bottom there. Oh well. Okay. So I want to show how I would approach making something like this. Was that your project crashed? My Maya just closed off. It didn't even technically it crashed, but it didn't even come up with the error. It just kind of died. Now, actually, this is a good thing to point out, if ever Maya crashes like this, if you're lucky, it might have saved a temporary file. I don't have autosave turned on. So that's just my computer. There's some issues with autosave, so I don't have it turned on. If you have autosave turned on, especially if you have Animbot, use that. It's very good. But if it crashes, you might be able to go to... Which folder is it? Does it have an autosave in documents that it just puts in automatically? Let me check. But if you can't find it there, there's a temp folder on your computer that might have the file in there. Let's see. No, I'm not seeing an autosave. Oh, wait, maybe here. So, look for the newest file. That's definitely not it. No autosaves. Dang it. So if you look in, I think it's program data, temp. Let me see here. I'll see if I can find it and then I'll show it. No, wait. Where is it again? Users. I haven't gotten into this folder in a while. I'm trying to remember where it is. We'll just see. App data, I think. Okay. Just doing a search right now. Yeah, users app data local temp. So that's where I am right now. I'm doing a search and trying to see if I have any new Maya files in here. So oftentimes you can find files in there. Now I'm just going to let it search here. And then actually, let's not do a .ma file search. Let's just go back and date modified. No, doesn't look like anything got saved. Oh well. It was worth a try. If it had crashed and came up with an error, most likely it would have shown up in that folder. Because it crashed and just shut down, I don't think anything got saved. But that's fine. Let's just get rid of this for now. Let's kind of go over how I would get a quick bend like this. Now, there's a few different ways you can do this. There's the manual way, which would be to create a polygon cube. And let's get that in place here. Like that. And then I can start extruding it. Now, the problem with this method, so we're going to do this very rough here. Make sure I don't select two faces. So extrude that, and I'll just pull it down and then around like that. This method works pretty well, but you'll notice that you start getting weird pinching. See right there how it got really thin? This is because things aren't going to round out properly and the faces are being stretched in weird ways. Now I can solve this by going in and using the multi-cut tool and rounding this out myself. But it starts to get kind of messy and you don't have a ton of control. So this is not my favorite way of doing these types of bends. Another way you can do it is using curves. So this is a really cool way, and I use this a lot for creating like horns or anything that has to have like a complex pattern. You create your object here. Then I'm going to create a curve tool. And you can use a CV curve or an EP curve. They create the same thing. A curve at the end is just the way they're created. So I can create a curve right here. Doot. Like so. Let's shape it a little bit more. Get that nice shaping in there. Maybe a little tighter on that side. Like so. Now, I just need to take the face here, select the curve, and then extrude. So extrude face. And we get that, which isn't really helping us a lot, is it? It's just gone straight across. Well, all we need is more divisions. So once you've done your extrude, just add more divisions. You'll notice it follows along with the curve. Let's kind of add quite a few here. There we go. So with this, I now have everything that flows nicely, and we're done. Now, if I want to, I can always go back to the curve. This is the nice part. There's construction history, which basically means that we can go back to our actual curve here and reshape it. And it's going to remember that and update our new surface. So let's kind of round this out here. We're getting kind of a little pinch in there. So kind of round that out right through there. Maybe tighten this up a little bit more here. And the front here is just a little weird. So I'm going to pull this up. Just a little bit like that. There you go. You can use that to make a rope, definitely. It would be a very simple rope, but it would still work. So, we've got that. Done. Pretty easy. Now, there is another method that you can use to make things like this. And I'm going to show this method. Let's actually move this out of the way. And I'm going to make sure that it doesn't get affected by the curve anymore just by deleting. You'll notice if I delete the curve, the whole thing deletes as well. Take your object, go to Edit, Delete by Type History. That'll remove the connection to the curve, and now it's its own object. So there's one more way you can do this. And I'm going to show this because it's a tool that is often misunderstood and is way more powerful than people give it credit at first, because most people don't actually know how to use it properly. And I'm not saying that, well, let me put it this way. The tool is not clear on how you should use it. But it is a very powerful tool. So let's say we've got this piece right here, and I want to create this bend right around there, that corner there. Well, there's a tool called the wedge tool. The wedge tool will essentially, let's actually open up the modeling menu set here. The reason I'm going to open the modeling menu set is because, so modeling right here, it has this multi-component mode, which allows you to select faces, edges, vertices all at the same time. So the wedge tool allows you to select a face and then an edge and then wedge that face around that edge. And you can adjust the wedge angle here, like so. So I can kind of go this way. Then let's take that face again, extrude, like so. And then select that face and the edge. Oops, face, multi-component, edge, wedge, maybe like so, like that. It's pretty powerful. But you'll notice that the wedges are always at really sharp corners. They're not rounding around a corner. It's just like bending super sharp right there. Ugh, not great. Well, you could try to take this and then bevel it, but that usually doesn't work out exactly how you want it to. And most people see this and go, nah, that's not what I want. They want a curve around a surface, like what we were getting here. A nice round shape. Well, how do we do that without having to use a curve or some complex setup? Well, this is where that misunderstanding comes in. The wedge tool needs to have a face and an edge selected. But it never says that they have to be connected to each other. So if I take this and I'm just going to duplicate the cube here, whoop, move it down. And then with both of these selected, go to multi-component. I'm going to select this face, but this edge. Then use the wedge tool. It goes around the other edge. It's wrapping around that. From there, I can now go into my wedge tool options. And I can adjust the angle. I can even adjust how far from the center it is and like readjust that corner right there. And get all of that nice little extra detail right there. So maybe we'll go around like that. So let's move this. Well, actually, let's do another extrude. Whoop, right there. Yep. And then let's say we want to extrude back the other way. Well, I'll use my temporary. This is basically just a polygon that you're using as a pivot point, essentially. So I'm going to put that here. Select my face here. And once again, I like the multi-component for this just because it's a little easier. Select multiple things. Face, edge, wedge. Now it's going the wrong way. So let's go back the other way. Like so. And you notice we're getting a little kind of divot right there. Well, that's when you go in and just have to adjust your center right there and boop, right there. Get that nice and exactly where you want. So now I can shape this, and unlike the extrude with a curve tool, which you can see it got us pretty close, but see how messy these corners are? We have no control over them. We just get whatever Maya gives us. Here, we're getting very clean curves and very clean corners. And later on, we can just, for example, use multi-cut and add some extra detail to help hold the object in place there. So there we go. So that was essentially the big thing I wanted to show with that tool is when you're trying to make things like these legs, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but I would use the wedge tool. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you're used to it, it really does make things a lot easier. So let's turn off wireframe on shaded. There we go. So you can see this nice, clean piece of metal. Done. And I would probably sharpen it just a little bit more. Something like that. So I would just kind of trace along, and then you've got that piece of metal, you're done. And from there, you would take all the pieces that we used to have and just angle them together. So you take the triangle piece here, the handle, as well as this piece. Once they're all created, group them together and rotate them. And you've basically got your main frame in place. At that point, we would just add the brace on the front right here to hold the two pieces of wood together, as well as the braces on the front here. And then you go into the little details like the nuts and bolts and things like that. But unfortunately, we kind of lost everything. But yeah, that's basically it. Honestly, there's not that many tools that we were using. The big thing is just knowing when and where to use them. That's practice. But I would say the main ones are extrude. That's going to be your best friend, especially for things like tires and cylindrical objects. Like even this water bottle here, you could probably make the majority of it with just the extrude tool. I've got a plate here. I had a snack before the stream. This would be all of the extrude tool. Polygon cylinder, extrude, 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 done. You've got the multi-cut tool. This allows you to add detail. You've got the bevel tool. This allows you to round edges out and get that nice softness to things, so things don't have that perfect sharp edge that is unrealistic. No edge has that. If you had a cube on your desk that had edges like this, the moment you would go to pick it up, your hand would be sliced to ribbons. This would cut through your desk and just sink to the floor. Those edges are too perfect. They're just too sharp. Lighting does not work like this on a natural object. So normally we want to add just a slight, I don't want to even say imperfection, but something for the light to bounce off of. And that creates a much more realistic object. So we're trying to add that in. You're using the 1, 2, and 3 keys to soften objects and get a little bit more detail and round things out a little bit without going too far. You've got things like the wedge tool, which once you know how to use it, can really help create some very interesting shapes very quickly. What else do we have? I guess the other big thing is keep in mind your topology. Regardless of what you're doing, you want to keep that nice clean topology. Now, do you always have to? No. For quick props that you're just going to throw in a scene, it's going to be in the background. Whatever. It's not that big of a deal if there's a 5-sided face or something like that. But if it's going to be a main thing in your scene, like this wheelbarrow, it's not just sitting off in the background. It's something the character is going to be moving around. The light's going to be catching on it. As much as I can, I don't want to have weird N-gons in there because they're going to catch the light in weird ways and it's just not going to be a good final product. So make sure you think of your topology, and you can use the multi-cut tool to help clean that up. I've also done a stream where I did a skateboard prop. Do I still have this skateboard prop here? Let's see. I think I have it. Props. I did a skateboard prop on stream, which if anyone wants to, I believe the video is still up on the Twitch stream, where I did a complex shape and I went through and retopologized it so that it was nice and clean. Now let me see if I can find it here. It took a little bit, but the technique I used is very similar to this. It's just drawing things out and using a tool called the Quad Draw tool to make it even easier to deal with something like that. Vehicles, I think. Yeah, here it is. So, goodbye, wheelbarrow. New scene. Open up the skateboard. So why is the game asset mostly triangulated? So that's for game engines. Game engines handle triangles better. They're more stable. So let me actually go over that demo here first. So if we have a cube, or let's say a quad versus a tri. So here we have a quad base, 4 edges. Here we're just going to cut this like so, and then delete that. So we've got a quad and a tri. Quads work really well because it's nice and symmetrical, and they can flow very nicely. So for example, on the skateboard here, let's turn on wireframe on shaded. You can see that all the edges flow very beautifully. You have edge loops. The moment you go into triangles, you don't have those anymore. It's very hard to have an edge that flows when there's all these triangles pointing off in different directions. So by keeping things in quads, it's much cleaner and it flows better. It's much better for modeling and sculpting. But they are not mathematically fast. They don't calculate very well because they can have imperfections to them. So for example, let's take this quad here and take this one vertex and move it up. Which way is it bending? Which way is this plane bending? We can see that it's not perfectly flat. And here it looks like it's bending this way. But if I turn it this way, suddenly it looks like it's bending here. So you can see it's bent here. Let's add a multi-cut. Cut it from here, down here. Oop. It changed its orientation. A quad isn't perfectly planar, which means that lighting can sometimes bounce in weird ways in a game engine. It's not fast. The game engine has to do more calculation to properly render it. A triangle is always flat. It's always planar. So if I move this up, I can move my camera in a way that is perfectly planar. If I move it over here, perfectly planar. If I move it over here, perfectly planar. If I take it and let's move it over here, perfectly planar. The game engine knows that this is a flat surface and it's never going to have any warps to it. So it calculates way faster. So it's really just whether you want the speed for the engine, tries are good. When you're calculating when you're doing more artistic things, sculpting, modeling, quads are better because they flow more easily. So hopefully that makes sense. And let's actually take this skateboard here. Find the geometry for it. And we'll just take the board part. And I'm just going to go to mesh, triangulate. So now it's triangulated. And you can see that that edge flow is very hard to spot. There's all of these extra triangles all over the place. This makes it very hard to work with when you're sculpting or modeling. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Now, to go back to the thing I wanted to talk about here is in terms of creating nice topology, sometimes for something like a board here, well, that's easy. It's just a simple basic object. Okay, no problem. But what happens when you have an object like this? Let's find is the truck. And let's just focus on this one object right here. How do you make this quadrangulated? All quads. That becomes very tricky. This took quite a while on stream to get just right. But as you can see, it's all triangles. Sorry, all quads. It's nice and flowing. It's got good, clean topology across the whole thing. Now, it took a while, but this is actually not that hard to do once you get used to it. And I'm not going to go over the whole workflow here, but if you look at the videos that A to the J posted, I go over the whole process of how I essentially used multiple different objects, put them together to create the shape that I wanted, and then reskinned it over top of those objects. So you could almost think of it like, how to say it? Let's say you had a few different, like a tennis ball, a baseball, a cube, and you want to make them one object. You put them all together in the configuration you want, and then you put a sock over it. And now it's all one object, and you just vacuum form the sock onto the object and just kind of shrink wrap it. And then you have a new object that has the original shape. That's the method I used for this. So I have this very complex form, but it didn't really take that long to do. You can see all these nice flowing edges and all of that stuff. So even if you have something complex, taking time to do the topology, especially if it's going to be something that you're going to use a lot in your scene, is important. Now, again, it really just depends on how much time you have. If your goal is animation, just put a prop in there, worry about it later. You can always replace it. But when you do want to work on a finalized prop, it is good to take the time for it. So, with that, does anyone have any questions before we call the stream here and move on with our days? One day I'm gonna finish rigging this and actually add bends and bend deformers and stuff. Boolean ZRemesher would do the trick fast. Yeah, so ZRemesher is a great tool. So for anyone who doesn't know it, in Maya you have the ZRemesh button here, or retopologize. Both are good for different situations, but both of these can basically redo the topology for an object for you. The one problem is that you don't have control over it. So these are both things that you would pretty much never use for like facial topology or for rigging, a complex rig. You would almost always have to do it manually for those. At least nowadays. There's some new tools coming out that are kind of making it a lot easier. But even the manual method is still kind of preferred because it gives us exact control over where things are. Now, actually, yeah, in ZBrush, you also have that as well. And ZBrush is really good too. So you could do it in Maya or ZBrush. Both would work. But having that knowledge of how to do it yourself, and whenever I do it, I always have those images that I showed earlier that kind of show you how to retopologize certain things. I always have that open on the side. It makes life a lot easier.